and welcome to Artalaap, South Asia's first independent visual culture podcast with me, Kamayani. Today I'm going to be in conversation with a friend of mine, Jayant Parashar. Jayant is a Bombay-based cinematographer, but we're not here to discuss his practice. Sorry, Jayant, I may have invited you here on false pretenses. Surprise!
Oh, shit.
Damn, I know. No, on this episode, we are going to talk about an English language film magazine called Film Pictorial that Jayant's grandfather, R.K. Parashar, founded along with his brother ML Parashar in Lahore in 1941. So it's a little glimpse into pre-independence cinephilia, and we're going to discuss how personal family archives interact with public history and media memories. Before we continue, I'd like to let our listeners know how to access the material accompanying our conversation. To view the images and other material being referenced and discussed in the episode, click on the link in the show notes to access the guide. You can also find the link to the guide for each episode in our Instagram captions and tweets. We want to keep bringing you unique content, so please consider supporting us on Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee. We have exclusive features for subscribers at different tiers. Jayant, thanks so much for joining us on Artalaap, even though I refuse to give in to your extortionate demands for payment to appear on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm still sending that invoice.
Okay, I don't know what you're talking about. So, your granddad, Jayant, R.K. Parashar's magazine, Film Pictorial, it's made cameo appearances in the footnotes of academic texts over the past decades in the work of scholars who focus on early and mid-century Hindustani cinema, as well as writers who were contemporaries of the magazine. But it's still a relatively lesser known resource, I would say. And there's a lot to be discussed, and many people have discussed about how print culture and cinema in the subcontinent together generated a certain kind of discourse, especially around modernity. But in this Artalaap, we'll keep it personal and focus on the family archive and its role in understanding history, especially in South Asia, and of course, its relationship to the subcontinent's wider media culture. So I'm just going to start with the basics first. Did you always know about your grandfather's legacy, or was it like a moment of discovery, like, wow, I'm truly the underachiever in this family?
Yeah, it was the latter. It was, I had no idea about what my grandfather was up to in his youth. Until I was into my early 20s. I mean, I have never seen my granddad. I've never met him. He passed away when my dad was 7 years old. So I have no memory of clearly I have no memory of my granddad. So growing up, of course, I had been hearing stories from my grandmom, from my dadi, about everything related to the partition and how where they lived in Lahore, what they did, what was their house like, and then the partition happened and they came here. Somehow, what my family did, what was the family business, so to speak, never came up. I never bothered to ask, no one bothered to tell me. I think in one of these conversations over the years, when I would always be bugging my dadi, asking, tell me something about Pakistan, something about Lahore. So I think in one of those conversations, she mentioned that we had a printing press. So I said, "Oh, that's nice. I mean, someone had a stationery shop, someone had a mithai ki dukaan, we had a printing press. That's great. We had a nice business. Sounds good." And she would mention that it was in partnership with a certain Mr. Dar. So okay, that was it. But I think again a few years from there, I found a book. We were in 2013 or 2014, I think. We were moving out of our house that I had been living in for 24 years, all my life basically, and we were clearing out everything. And
Yeah, in Delhi, right?
yeah, in Delhi. in Delhi. So we were clearing out everything. We were just getting ready to move, and there are of course always spaces in your house that go unnoticed for years. So there was one such corner, one such nook that just had a bunch of interesting books. Like just interesting books from the 1960s, 70s, from different authors. One of those books was a book called Celebrities, uh, and it was for 5 rupees, printed in 1951. Yeah, 1951, and
Wow. What a promising title.
my dad knew about it. Turns out, I mean, obviously, I mean, he just decided to take that book and just extend that towards me and said that, hey, have a look. So okay, I said okay, I'll have a look. So I was just going through it. It had pieces on the important figures of 1940s and 50s. So there was Nehru, there were other people from that, and there was uh, what's his name, Sorab Modi, and and then there was a certain Mr. Parashar's, and I said, what is that? So I read that, and then I got to know that there is that we apparently had a film magazine, and so I mean, then I just got really curious, and I was like, what dad, like what?
ये बात आपने मुझसे छिपाई.
That's exactly what I said. And then he said, "Oh yeah, of course we had this." I said, "You never told me." He said, "You never asked." I said, "What do you mean I never asked?"
Oh
Like,
my god, this is like,
so
I love how your dad's being so casual about this. It's something you should have specifically known to ask him. Hey, did we like run a major film magazine back in the day?
right. So anyway, so I go through that and I get to know that okay, something interesting was up in the 40s. Uh, Along with the book, I found two small briefcases full of black and white photographs from film sets in the 1940s. There were there were you know working stills of a film set. Then there was a photo of Raj Kapoor sitting down and like looking at his script, and a bunch of other bizarre things. So that's when I got to know that that my family owned and ran a film magazine. So yeah, that's how I got to know.
Wow, that's quite a story. I was having this conversation with a couple of archivists at a university a few days ago, and they said it always like bothered them how it's culturally just not an attitude that we have in this part of the world to really protect and preserve our the remnants of our time. And there's, I mean, especially among like families, right? There's usually not that kind of attempt to safeguard it or keep it for future generations. So I think it's great that you were able to stumble upon this. But did you find the magazines, the back issues of the magazines as well in the so-called attic?
No, no, I did not. That the photographs was all I found, and I had no idea. I mean, and then I said, okay, where are the magazines? They said we don't know. There was a small like there was a story about how there was a small dispute in the family, and then a bunch of things were thrown out of the house, and the stencils as well as back issues of the magazines were part of that. And I said, okay, then that's it. So
Oh wow.
you know I guess I'll never see the magazines. I still persisted. I thought I would still keep looking, and there I was on the internet in 2000, in the 2010s, and looking for a magazine that was published in the 1940s. I kept typing the keywords film pictorial everywhere. I mean, I would find a film pictorial from the US, from the UK, and
Yeah.
after a point I started doubting if he ever had any. I said, okay, maybe that's not it. That's basically that's it.
Maybe this is like one of those partition stories, those mythologies
Right.
families make up ना कि हम
Exactly.
हमारे पास जमीन थी, यहाँ पे हमारे पास फिल्म
Exactly.
मैगजीन थी.
Exactly. तो वही
Yeah.
मुझे लगा. So, but anyway, I would whenever I would get time, I would just try to. I'm no researcher. I had no idea how to do this formally properly, right? I would just go on Google and type it, and go to the last page, like the 36th page of Google and see what I'm getting. One of those evenings that I would was trying to look for it, I found a forum, like one of those old Rediff
Wow.
forums or Yahoo kind of forums. It wasn't a
That
Rediff
is like
forum.
ancient.
Exactly. So it wasn't Rediff, it was something like that. And there was a post by a gentleman which read, uh, I am getting back issues of magazine Film Pictorial from someone from someone, some XYZ person, and he's asking for X amount of money. If he doesn't sell it, he's saying that he'll throw it away or burn it or something like that, something weird and dramatic like that. So that was the thread, and then there were
Wow.
replies by people and who were talking about, okay, let's do it. That was my first introduction to crowdfunding on a website. That was there was someone trying to crowdfund to buy to just basically buy off old magazines. I saw that, I witnessed that, I took a screenshot. I tried to contact the person. The website had asterisks in in,
Yeah.
all the important spaces of that email ID, so I couldn't really tell.
Right.
So
Yeah.
privacy of the
Poster. Yeah.
poster was being protected,
Yeah.
and I said okay. I anyway couldn't find it. So I mean, and I think I would assume that that crowdfunding campaign was successful, and the others from that forum paid the money, and the gentleman had, in fact, on that thread, promised that if you all give me the money, I will scan all of this and make it public for you to look at.
Okay.
So I think a year after I saw this thread, I had forgotten about this, but I went again, like, like a regular Monday morning. I wake up, I make my coffee, and I search for,
Yeah.
film pictorial on the internet. And this time I found it on the first page, first result.
Wow.
So this person,
How are the turntables?
yeah, I know, right? So this person, Pradhyapak Surjit Singh, who's a professor from Punjab, runs a blog on films, everything about films.
Yeah.
And there it was. There were like some
Wow.
12 issues, and I just found them, and I could go through all of them, and
Right.
I could see my granddad in some of the photos in the last few pages. And that was really, that was a that was an that was just like, yeah, it was a beautiful moment
Wow.
to have found that, to have and then I showed it to everyone in the family, and that was the first time all of them were seeing, like my grandma, of course, was seeing that, a photo of my granddad from that time after
Yeah.
so many years, and my dad was seeing it for the first time, and everyone else in the family was seeing it. So I did not know what my granddad looked like in his 20s, for example. So I mean, that was just for as a family, that was a moment. Of course, there was so much more to
Wow.
the magazine, but for us, it was enough that we
Sure.
could just see. I could see my
Yeah.
granddad, and now just see a picture of him. So yeah, so that's how I then found the digital copies of the bag. After that, I tried speaking to Mr. Sujit
Yeah.
Singh to see if I can get the print versions, but we're still talking. He's a very serious collector of things. So yeah. So we'll probably get to that conversation at some point.
Yeah.
He didn't want to let go of the.
Sure. No, and that's somewhat understandable. And I think, like we were discussing earlier, that because we live in a culture where this kind of the idea of the collectible or the historical value of artifacts of this nature are not particularly understood.
Exactly.
People like Pradhyapak Singh are kind of rarities in themselves, to make the effort to amass this collection and then make it available for public viewing. it's commendable and it's important work. Um, yeah, and I think it's interesting also what you said about seeing your granddad in his youth. I think that can be very powerful sometimes as a grandchild or a descendant to sort of almost try to like find your face in theirs.
Right.
Um, and I think it's also because in so many ways you are leading up you're leading somewhat parallel lives, right? Being involved in the movies. But we'll get to that. But
Mhm.
I was reading the one piece available on R.K. Parashar and his brother, your great uncle ML Parashar, and clearly, like the Parashar brothers were from a well-off Punjabi family. Their dad was a district collector, right?
Mhm.
What do you know about their background and their sort of growing up years? Why do you reckon they gravitated towards the movies? What was it about their personalities that you think lent itself to the founding of a film magazine of this nature?
I tried speaking to a few elders in the family. They said that, that these brothers were always the stars of the family. They did a lot of things other than the magazine. Yeah, so whatever my dad has written is also knowledge that he's gathered from the book that I told you I found, and some of it is from different sources of information from within the family. But yeah, from what I know is that they studied law. He started writing for the Tribune in Lahore. I think they just knew people in the film industry, and somehow it became a thing.
I reckon it's them being these lads about town in Lahore in the film circles, writing about film. That in itself, I think, opened certain kinds of doors and opportunities for them to become more involved. Right, like this wasn't the first magazine, film publication that they started. That they started something in the 1930s called Movie
Movie
Flash,
Flash, right?
right? So there was already a kind
Which
of
was weekly.
a weekly. Okay. So there was a kind of precedent to this. So, but yeah, I mean, I think it's like being in Lahore, the cinema must have been a big part of their
Hmm.
life, right? Because along with Bombay, it was the other hub or locus of film production before the
I
partition.
would imagine
And
so.
in
Yes.
fact, as we know, so many film artists and workers from stars to directors to producers to writers, they all came from Lahore. So they were probably quite well connected, and that also gave them a chance to amass that kind of information, to muster that kind of information
Right.
that this magazine comprises. Um, so, yeah, I think one of the things that I find sort of both frustrating and thrilling about historical material in South Asia is that it's so hard to find and access. There'll always be that one journal or magazine that has all the answers for your thesis, but it's lost forever in the
Right.
sands of time. And I'm thinking of actually Yasir Abbasi's book, Ye Un Dino Ki Baat Hai, because that came out quite recently, and I think a lot of people would have known. A lot of people who are interested in Hindi film history would know of it. It's an incredible collection of essays from once popular Urdu film magazines, like, for example, Shama, that have since faded from public memory. And in an interview, he discussed how difficult it was for
Hmm.
him
I'm sure.
to
Yeah,
even find this material.
it is so
Yeah.
difficult.
Um, I went through some of the back issues of Film Pictorial, and they're really interesting. So the editorials by your granddad and his colleague, Mr. Dar, whom you mentioned.
Yeah, I think DARs were the proprietors. I mean, the creative inputs were by the Parashar brothers. That much my grandma told me with confidence.
Okay.
The Dar Parashars were, of course, the editors proprietors, and the face of the magazine were kind of the.
I thought that the editorials were quite serious minded. There's one in April 46 speaking against communalism in cinema. So much has changed. And one in February 1946 supporting the unionization of film
Right.
workers. Writing. There's a lot of writing by stalwarts like K. Abbas, Allama Iqbal's son Javed Iqbal, former INB minister Basant Sathe. I mean, he would go on to become INB minister in independent India, Basant Sathe. So, clearly a constellation of big names.
There were also some posters that would mention the budget of the film, like Chandra Art Productions, 40 crores.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was in the money actually.
yeah, it was a big deal, I think, at the time. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
as it still is, right? I mean, just the amount of money spent on a film is often continues to be a big promotional aspect, because it means that the audiences might be treated to some kind of visual spectacle or a production value that they have not seen in the past.
Right, right.
So that's probably the reason why. Um, so clearly, the magazine was targeted at a wide range of readers. I mean, obviously, people who were film viewers, but also those within the trade. And I think, like I mentioned, the movie land section was about like industry news.
Mhm.
So that was also interesting because clearly people were looking to learn about what was happening, um,
Right.
within the firmament as well.
Yeah, and it always said by our special correspondent. They never mentioned who wrote it.
Yeah, this is like a very special guest appearance, a very special appearance for Hindi filmों के end में होता है ना.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's some. It's the same logic. Um, and like you said, there's also a lot of really spicy stuff. Like there's this columnist called Debunker,
Right.
writing these provocative features. So like one of them is about stars and their guardians. And they're basically talking about the institution of the guardian, especially in relation to like female actors.
Right.
The people who had to be around on set to protect the virtue of the female film star or
Right.
whatever. I mean, so there's a particular category of individual. And so Debunker comes down against it because it hampers their independence and craft, and they debunk guardianship in the film industry. But I mean, clearly, like this person's entire jam was to like write these contrarian
Mhm.
pieces, and which sort of in some instances really went against the grain of what was
Mhm.
happening. So and in combination with things like the editorials supporting unions and those decrying communalization, I feel like the magazine was definitely positioning itself as a progressive
Absolutely. Yeah.
publication.
That was very clear. It was clearly, yeah, trying to be a very progressive magazine for sure.
Yeah. But also, like in the magazine, like my personal favorite, I think, is a gossip column called "Believe It or Not." There is some wild shit in there. So, in the December 1944 issue, they feature stars stating their New Year resolutions, and like Suraya is quoted as saying, "This year I must have dates, and not the ones that grow on trees." And then David says, "This year I will tell no dirty jokes, at least not the old ones." And I'm just like, I mean, when you think about it, like you look at how carefully curated star images are today, and how mindful everybody is of what they say, and how much their PR persons and their PR agencies are involved in making sure that everything that comes out of their mouths is, for the most part, filtered. Even like their social media presence is so uh, sort of, it's so sanitized. To hear these kinds of quips and rejoinders, I just think it's hilarious.
Yeah, of course. Like I can't imagine a column like that in a magazine. Any like in this time, of course, there were the actors, producers, music directors. They were just saying whatever the hell they wanted to, and they were clearly getting away with it. And I mean, of course, there was no internet, and it wasn't that every. I mean, for anyone to get to that information would take a lot of time, and I guess it was just an interesting time to live in then back.
Yeah, but it's just funny also because like so many of the people who are reported on in these gossip columns also, like very brazen about like their dislike of their colleagues and
Yeah,
who they'll work with and who they won't work with and never again. And it's just hilarious because you're like, wow,
definitely.
like you guys don't care about burning bridges at all.
So true. I that's exactly what I thought too when I looked at those columns. It was bizarre.
Yeah,
In Manto, there is a scene where there's a producer who it's not mentioned who he is there. Uh, he's there are a few models in swimsuits in his office, and he's approving them for a
sure,
role or
a
something.
role.
I have the photo of that moment in that briefcase.
Oh
Like
God.
so I know I had seen that photo, and then I saw that scene recreated in that
Wow.
movie. And
So there was a producer, you're saying there was a producer who would audition young women,
yeah,
uh, aspiring actresses like this, and there was a photograph that probably was taken by someone associated with this publication of your granddad's
right, the
with
Film
Film
Pictorial.
Pictorial.
Right.
Wow.
And I mean, and of course, I'm sure, since of course that photo was not in the magazine at all. But I mean, I don't know. Of course, like when the research team of Manto was doing the research, they would have, of course, come across this from at some point from somewhere.
Sounds like it might have been a genre of photograph
Yeah,
that film magazines had access to or had. This is more like the behind the scenes uh, detritus, that
right.
didn't make it into the
Hmm.
pages. So yeah,
Right.
it's interesting though. Must have been kind of a surreal moment because you came across it years earlier and then to see it on
It
screen.
was right. I know.
Yeah, like sexual predation is so old. I mean, that's also
Mhm.
one of the things. I mean, we kind of belaboring it, but so much of what we're kind of encountering within and adjacent to film magazines or publications or media from the 40s and 30s and that era, it doesn't seem like the needle has moved all that much. Like we're kind of coming up against very similar uh, concerns and issues, and the context hasn't changed much at all. I mean, you look at something like
True.
the
True.
Kashmir Files, you know, and you think about these editorials about the communalization of cinema, written 70 years ago, and you're just stumped that we're still here having the same conversation.
Nothing has changed.
Nothing at all. Um, and I think, like, on that note, I also thought maybe you might want to talk about it. So, Film Pictorial ultimately kind of falls prey to the partition, right? Because after your granddad and his family moved to Delhi
Right.
from Lahore, the magazine winds up. So, when exactly does the last issue come out? Do you know?
I mean,
Or can you guess?
I only have access to the last issue that I have access to is April 1946.
Right. Okay.
I'm sorry, August 1946.
August 1946. Yeah. So, but wow, like a whole year before the partition happens.
But I'm sure there were more issues. I just don't have access to
Okay.
them yet. Because yeah, I mean the idea was to uh, reach uh, India and reach Bombay and kind of resume work from here.
And so then the magazine had sort of stopped
It had stopped, yes. So
after arriving in India.
right.
Information about the magazine proper, that I think is still quite hazy, or like that whatever we
Mm-hmm.
do have now, thanks to the efforts of your dad and you,
Pradhyapak Surjit
and
Singh.
yeah, and Pradhyapak Singh ji, yeah, of like keeping the magazine uh, preserved and available. Um, but so to sort of also come back to Yasir Abbasi's book, one of the what we were mentioning, one of the famous Urdu film magazines that resurfaced as a result of his book was the Yusuf Dehelvi's Shama Magazine. Yusuf Dehelvi was the editor and founder, and belongs to one of the great families of Delhi. So yeah, and I know that his grandson is a friend of yours, right, Arman?
Arman.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting, like an interesting coincidence with both of your grandparents.
Yeah, it is really interesting. I remember. I mean, I did not know that Arman's Nana had been running Shama in the 40s. When I told Arman that I have found something like this, or I think by the time I told Arman, I did not have access to the magazines. I just knew that we had a magazine and it was in Lahore. I approached him because I told him about this also because he has family in Karachi and he keeps going
Hmm.
visiting them. So I had asked him to if asked him I had requested him if he could go to Lahore and just take a picture of what used to be the office of Film Pictorial. That's when he told me that his maternal grandfather also ran a film magazine called Shama, which, like you said, of course, is very interesting how
Yeah.
we came to be friends, and we have similar histories. And then he, of course, was the person who finally went to Lahore and managed to take a picture of the building, which by the time he reached had been razed to the ground, half of it.
Damn. Um, but I also wanted to ask, like, how do you reflect on your granddad's legacy as a cinematographer and a film worker yourself? Because I know we were joking about the parallels, but I mean, clearly there's something there.
I mean, I guess. I mean, for example, I remember going. I was in come to Bombay much before I had come here in 2017 to move to look for work, and I was here for 7 days. And my dad was like, "Oh, if you want to stay back for a few more weeks to look for work, do it." And all of this is before I had found the magazines. This is right after college.
Mm.
And then when I found the magazine, I kind of understood why he was saying that, because he knew that there was something, there was a legacy of some kind. And now I see it. I mean, and coming to the point of how I see it, I think if maybe in the future I am to write or direct something, this would be something which is, of course, like close to my heart, and something that would really be the first thing I would pick up to work on.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's a great idea. Actually, I mean, it's so ripe with possibility. As a documentary, as a non-fiction essay film. Uh, so I think that there's something there. I hope you circle back to it at some point.
I hope so too. Yeah.
Yeah, but this is a good start. I think that I'm so glad we had this conversation because now lots of things about the magazine are on the record, and hopefully there'll be a resource for maybe people working on film magazine culture in the key independence period in general. Thank you so much for giving us time on Artalaap. I really appreciate you carving time amidst your hectic schedule to come on Artalaap.
Absolutely. I mean, I could go on really. I really would. I mean, I really want to talk more about this family archive.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe maybe the next time you come, it really will be about your work on this archive. So then, like, the false pretext on which I invited you will be no longer false.
I hope so.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us on Artalaap.
Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed Artalaap, please like and share the episode over social media. For more information and updates, you can follow us on Instagram at art.alaap and on Twitter at @RTALAAP.